Hey, Rod, what's happening?
Organic deodorant. I'm in LA, man, so I'm like part hippie. But actually, this one because I think you use the same.
Jason.
Jason.
Yeah.
I think that's how you pronounce it.
I just didn't expect you to say deodorant. I was expecting something else. But yeah,
organic
keep going.
Gluten-free bread.
Organic deodorant. Spray on kind.
Organic deodorant.
Yeah.
It's money, man.
Yeah.
Like, people don't understand the aluminum.
And especially in antiperspirants. The aluminum and antiperspirants in particular.
That stuff goes right in.
Yeah. It's bad for
And
it.
actually, there have been some recent studies that have been talking about the negative side effects of that over long-term use.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's I tried a lot, like Burt's Bees and other things, and I'm not, trying to be negative on those. But the stick just makes me sweaty. But the spray,
well, that's the thing though. Like everybody, because I've read tons and tons of blogs and blogs and websites about people's top 5 organic deodorants, and some love the sticks, some love the sprays. There's one stick that works for me. I can't remember the name of it, but only one. All the other ones were garbage for me. But it's just it's all personal.
You got to try them. But I and you love Jason.
I just wish they had different scents.
They do.
What is it? It's like the pine forest.
Yeah, they have the pine forest. They have like the cucumber, which I'm not a huge fan of the cucumber.
I've never tried that.
Yeah. But I think those might be the only 2 cents. But
I need more scents.
Hey, if you're into not having aluminum, I think this is a good one. How did this become your shtick or my shtick?
Well, I'm changing the game.
It was good. It was good.
This is More in Common. Hi, I'm Rob, a listener and fan of the show, and I'm here to introduce today's all-new episode. Rodney and Keith are diving into real and unscripted conversations. They're not afraid to sit down and talk about the elephant in the room. The conversations on this podcast are thought-provoking and completely raw. They don't leave any stone unturned to get to the real story. This is the first season of 2020 that they have dubbed a decade possible, and season 1 is Pursuit. Remember, you can find all things More in Common at www.moreincommonpod.com. There you will find back episodes, merchandise, blogs, and a lot more. And definitely, if you enjoyed today's episode, give them a like in your favorite podcast app. Leave a review. It might just get read on the air. And please, share with your friends. On to today's episode with Nicole Davis. Former Olympian Nicole Davis speaks on the importance of believing in yourself in times of stress and uncertainty. She pushes her audience to embrace uncomfortable moments as a catalyst to improve themselves in any facet of life. Davis is a retired 2-time Olympian and 2-time silver medalist. She spent 11 years on the USA National Volleyball Team and played professional in 8 different countries in Europe and Asia. She also helped lead her team in back-to-back NCAA Championships in USC in 2002 and 2003. Davis currently works as a coach and expert on high performance and cultural development at a company co-founded by Pete Carroll and Dr. Mike Gervais. Her vision is to help accelerate the learning of others through her experiences in pursuing her best in her craft and on the world stage. She is passionate about impacting others and has seen what people are capable of. There is now more science and language around the processes that allow people to really get after it in life and pursue their potential.
And So we learn to play it safe and to worry about whether other people think of us because of the messaging that we get when we're kids, you know, versus like, okay, let's figure out how to go for this in a way. And like, I'll be there if it doesn't work out, you know, but like, let's see what happens right now. So I think that's part of it. The messaging that we get as we're growing up is to play it safe. So in terms of like self-compassion and self-empathy, it's like, can I hold space for myself in the same way that I would for my best friend in a time of need? And then can I meet myself with the level of understanding that I would with my best friend in a time of need? Because I think we're often trying to externalize those needs, you know, holding space and understanding, and it gets in the way of acceptance.
Welcome back, everybody. We are here with Nicole Davis. Hi, Nicole.
What's up, guys?
Thanks for joining us.
Fired up to be here.
Yeah. Power outage. We powered through.
We're adjusting.
We're high performing our batteries.
Yes, we are. Got backups. Got a few backups.
Backup/wait.
Yep.
So you have a TED Talk.
Oh,
Pretty
yeah.
awesome.
Thanks.
You forget about it?
Feels like a lifetime ago,
Yeah.
just like my career.
And you talk about your excellence starting with finding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? How do people find themselves?
I think it's less of a question of like finding yourself. It's not like a rock that you go unturned, but it's paying attention to how you've been living your life and what principles have driven your thoughts, your words, and your actions. Because at the essence of authenticity is alignment of those three things: your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And so if you pay attention, or even if you take the time and create space for yourself to anchor some of those principles to paper, you might just be able to distill down who you are as a human being and what drives you. And
So is it kind of like that Bruce Lee, the medicine that I needed was in me the whole time? I'm paraphrasing, but
yeah,
everything I needed was here. I just needed to listen to it, kind of thing.
That's right. I think generally when we look at, you know, performance psychology, that to be able to anchor to that idea is critical, that everything I need is already within me. And often we're searching for more, especially externally, as we're trying to show up and be our best, whether that's being an authentic person in our role at the workplace or just showing up and being our most authentic self in something that we're performing in terms of sports or as a parent. So I think when we're looking for outside or external validation, then it's really easy to get lost in the moment or get pushed around by the environment or people around us or social constructs. And that's when we lose who we are and how we want to show up and be in a way that's a best representation of ourselves.
Do you have ways for people, leading question, to really tap in to marrying those three things together, like observationally? How does someone go about building, as you say, the reps to really find that place?
Repetitions, bro.
To find oneself and then show up and be that more often. One would be to create space for yourself to actually do the work and anchor it to paper.
What does that mean?
What does do the work mean specifically?
Most of us don't sit in self-reflection anymore. So to sit, and whether that's in a mindfulness meditation practice and do some contemplative mindfulness and ask yourself the difficult questions like, who am I? What are my strengths? How am I going to bring those into the world today? Or just to sit and think about the people that we admire most and why, words and phrases that have helped shape our lives, words that we tend to use a lot because language is an extension of our thoughts. And so that gives us great insight into our inner workings, to go back and reflect on pivotal moments in your life and what was driving decisions in those moments. But to sit in reflection in some sort of way to decode or distill down kind of everything that we value to our core principles so that it's really concise, so that you have a reference point when you get tested to be able to come back to. If you don't do the work to anchor it, then we don't have a reference point or a compass, and we tend to get lost in that space if we haven't done the work. So one would be to sit in self-reflection. The second is to memorize it and then actually share it with people. You know, like, this is what I'm all about as a human being. And then maybe even you're open to being held accountable to it, So like, hey, I'm going to screw this up sometimes, and I need you to lock arms with me and be able to like say, hey, this is what I know you're all about right now. How can I help you be that more right now? And then the second is like actually seek to get it tested. Like if you're all about risk, right? If that's what you stand for as a human being, like are you purposefully and intentionally stepping outside of your comfort zone every single day, or do you play it safe? And then you have this idea that you're about risk, but you don't really live into it. So that would be my recommendation for how to get repetitions at being your most authentic self.
That thing on being willing to be called out on it, invoking our good friend Dolly. She has this concept of being a good-ish person.
Good-ish. I love it. It's so good.
Like, I'm not finished.
Yeah.
It's okay to make a mistake. What do I learn from it? I had a question, and then I lost it.
Yeah, what I love about that, though, is that I think her point is that shame is what gets in the way of us. In particular, she speaks to bias, obviously, but shame is what gets in the way of us confronting bias and then doing different because for various reasons. One of it is just a need to be morally good as human beings. But I think
shame being the thought that I am bad.
Right, exactly. Like, oh, wait, I have a bias, but I'm a good person, right? Exactly. And all of us have biases. They're built into the way the brain is designed. But the same thing, like we want to think of ourselves as good human beings, great people. And so then that gets in the way. The shame, embarrassment, self-critique, I think, is one of the biggest things that gets in the way of us saying, like leading with, I'm not going to get this right all the time, but I want to get it right. And so being held accountable on the flip side of that is maybe just even asking for help. For some reason, for human beings, seems like a really difficult thing to do. But it's interesting for me, coming from an athletic background, is that the feedback loop in sports, especially at an elite level, is very, very quick. Because
like when you mess up, you hear about it right away.
Right.
And you know about it and you hear about it.
Yeah, and it's not just a top-down process, right? Because often, like in the environments that I work in with corporate clientele, it's a top-down process, feedback is. Right. And it happens like quarterly, right? But like in the world of sport at an elite level, feedback, there's an internal mechanism for feedback because there's such great kinesthetic awareness for most elite performers. But then your teammates are also there giving you some sort of feedback, whether it's nonverbal or verbal. And then there's a video camera watching everything you do. There's statistics being taken for everything you do. And then there's a coach, also the top-down process that takes place. And every rep that you take gets you feedback. And so the accountability is built-in mechanism for sport. But outside of that, it's not the same. The feedback isn't as quick. The cost is that we're not learning at the same pace. And so
real quick,
accountability.
random question.
Yeah.
Do you ever have a moment where you mess something up and you're like, shit, that's on tape. I'm going to have to see that later. Do you ever have that?
Of course. In the USA Volleyball Gym, it's like Big Brother. Like, not only do we have, like, cameras next to the stat people, but then in the gym there are cameras. And so you can actually log into something and, like, go back and watch your own practice. But you also, like, know that once a week you're meeting with your positional coach and they're going to play. They're going to play that back, that bonehead mistake. You're going to see it. Yeah.
How do you suggest, because that regular accountability being built into the process in regular everyday life, like you said, requires you to make that effort. How do you make it regular without putting too much burden?
You mean for like non-athletes?
Else? Yeah, for like you know, if you're trying to find it and live your best life, like do you have suggestions for making that regular?
Yeah. First of all,
Instagram.
Instagram. Yeah. First of all, we are our greatest feedback mechanism. I don't think we tap into it enough. So we have the potential to be our greatest possible coach, but also the worst possible coach. So understanding what your self-talk is like and whether that's building you up or breaking you down, I think is critical to accountability, because if your self-talk just constantly breaks you down, it doesn't matter what someone else is going to say. The way you attribute what they're saying is going to impact your ability to be held accountable or receive feedback in the future. So I think it's difficult to receive feedback if you can't get yourself right. So I would say start with yourself and understand what your inner workings are like. And really, like, are you fundamentally designing your life around growth, which is what elite performers do?
Sorry, before growth.
Yes.
On the mindset piece. like specifically the self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
You were a super high performing athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Did you always feel that way about self-talk? Like, how did you feel about it as you were coming up, playing or moving about the world?
Yeah, I didn't know that you could formally train your mind until after I was a 2-time Olympian and maybe the best player in the world in my position. And so my self-talk was very self-critical. I would beat myself up a lot. So this is what's hard about self-critique, is that for most people to get you good, you know, like the thought, like, I'm not good enough yet, and so I'm going to work harder, you know?
Like that voice is helping you.
Yeah, right. But it's also like a
by
quick,
beating the shit out of
it's
you.
like a little quick jab to the face as well, you know. And if you jab yourself in the face enough, at some point you're gonna, you might need to take
the
10,
match out,
take 10.
right?
And
Like,
what that looks like in terms of performance is that you're not going to squeeze out that last 10%, whatever. I'm making up a number, you know. But it's a cost to like pushing the ceiling of your potential. It's also a cost to the way you experience your pursuits. So I think often.
Well, how do you rationalize that? Because like, if you were the best position, potentially the best in your position in the world, yet you didn't even realize that you could tap into that last whatever percent.
I would say I did. I knew there was more in me. I just didn't have. I didn't
know how to get there.
I didn't know how to get there until we started working with Dr. Mike Gervais. Our team did the last 3 years of my
How
career.
did you know there was more?
It's just an internal. I know, right? Because there were moments, for example, where I would show up and everything felt aligned for me. Who I was,
like flowish or
flow state, but not just like peak performance, but also like a sense that I was expressing myself in an authentic way
so you
while
felt like
performing. Yeah, so I felt like me, but then also I was executing the best that I could at that time.
Yeah.
And so like when things are off, we feel it if you pay attention. There's tension inside of our body somewhere, and so for me, like that was the compass. I would leave certain matches, even though the numbers were where they needed to be. Like I could feel that I left something.
You weren't
out.
fully aligned.
But I didn't always know how to move the needle towards more alignment, for example. You know, so it was an internal feeling that I felt.
But to get to, like, where did that come from for you? Like, is that something that you just felt as innate in you every day? Like, that's something I find fascinating about athletes at your level. Like, it starts somewhere and it seems innate and natural. Is it something your parents helped you with? Like, where did that come from?
I can't speak to whether it's innate and natural, you know, like I haven't read any research in terms of, I mean, conscientiousness would fall into
Nature
like as
first,
a personality trait would fall into self-awareness, you know, but I think because of the environment, the inherent ecosystem of sport is that you're required to get uncomfortable every single day. And it's in that space that we learn the most about ourselves, and it's where we grow. And so
or not.
Or not,
like,
right?
It weeds people out too, right?
Right, exactly. And so...
and you kept going.
Yes, I kept going. But I think the self-awareness is built in the space of being uncomfortable. And then when you reach moments of peak performance, it's like, oh, that's what's possible. And then when you get uncomfortable, you increase or enhance your ability, your skill, and your craft. And then you reach a higher level of peak performance. Like there continues to be that calibration of what's possible versus like what is right now. And so I think for me, just the design of elite sport around growth and getting uncomfortable, like we look to invite stress into our ecosystem every day, whereas in most other environments, people are trying to avoid stress.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it hurts.
So I think it's a good teacher.
Volleyball?
It was kind of silly, actually. I was in 8th grade, and I had the choice to go to the public school or the private school. I chose the public school, and I had never played volleyball before, maybe like once or twice, PE family reunion or something, but never organized volleyball. And someone from the public school came to my 8th grade class and put pieces of paper up on the whiteboard and said, if you wanted to try out for a sport, put your name up. And at the time I was doing martial arts.
And you're like a black belt, right?
Yeah. At the time I was doing martial arts and I wanted to get back into team sports again. I don't. In retrospect, I don't know why, because I was a terrible teammate at the time. Because I competed so hard. I was at the cost of everyone else, and like I didn't.
An Olympian competed so hard, everybody else felt alien.
No one else felt.
This isn't fun, Nicole.
But
you know why it's not fun? Because you suck and we're not winning. That's why this isn't
grade,
fun.
Nicole. Like 8th grade volleyball, Nicole.
So I literally just wanted to play a team sport again. I thought volleyball looked like fun,
and it ended up being fun for you.
Yeah. To be honest, like I showed up in like jean shorts the day before. I was like, "Hey, Mom, I think I should buy some knee pads." Like I had no idea what volleyball was about, really, or the culture of volleyball. But yeah, I had a blast.
What is the culture of volleyball? Or what did you mean by that?
I think when we look at team sports, volleyball is one of the team sports where like there's such a reliance on everyone executing their job well. Like in basketball, you can have a Kobe Bryant that scores 100 points. And in volleyball, you can have an athlete score 44 points or something like that. But she can't score those 44 points if someone's not passing the ball well and a setter's not hooking her up, And if even that, it's like it's more complex than that. I don't want to get into volleyball jargon, but like an outside hitter, for example, that's hitting on the left side of the court, his or her job is a lot easier if the setter is great at running and balanced offense, because then they don't always have two blockers in front of them. And on the world stage, when you have two blockers in front of you, it's really hard to hit at a high efficiency. So there's so many like aspects, of the game that like no one can do it alone. And I think for me that's one of the things that like I recognized early, even though I couldn't articulate what that was, is that like we all had to be in it together. I think I was also really fortunate that my coach when I was in high school and for the last part of my club volleyball career, spent a lot of time developing us as people. So one of the things that we did was we read John Wooden's Pyramid of Success. Every single week we read a different building block of the pyramid and did activities around that. So we essentially were doing character development and tying that back into why that matters for us as individuals and why that matters for the culture of the team. And so, I was an outside hitter. I'm 5'4". That's like stupid nowadays. Like there are 13-year-olds that are 5'4". So like
but it didn't matter.
Yeah, my junior and so our tallest player was 5'11", and my junior and senior year we played in the state finals against April Ross's team. Most people, if they know anything about volleyball, would recognize April Ross. And we lost in both matches because their X's were a lot bigger than our O's. But we
is that really what it broke down to?
Yeah, they had 4 girls that were 6 foot or taller, and all 4 of them signed to Division I schools. So they were just like more physical, but we were a great team. But yeah, anyways, we were far more successful than we should have been, or just like looking at us, And so I think those were good lessons for me in terms of like what it's like. I was also, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards a little bit, but in the car the other day, I was thinking about like how special it is when we achieve something with a group of people. Like I think there are few things that feel that good, than when you're in it with a group of people, whether it's one other person or many other people. And I don't know if I want to call it like group flow, but like you put in the work, and then whether the outcomes are what you need them to be or not, like that feeling of peak performance with other people. I think that's really special.
I mean, we're animals, and
social creatures.
We're very social, and that makes a lot of sense.
If your coach was like a lot of high school coaches, like ones I experienced, yelled at you all the time and made you feel like whatever you're doing wasn't the way he was. Do you?
Probably not. Yeah, I was a great little athlete, and so there were lots of sports that I could have played, So I've on several occasions given credit to my coach and his wife. His wife was actually like really important in guiding me as a young, very reactive, kind of hot-headed, competitive athlete. So I feel very fortunate for both of them.
You seem so calm. Hot-headed.
Years later, lots of
Growth.
mindfulness.
I'm breathing deeply right now. Volleyball seems to have like I've learned a little bit more about it, especially since moving out here. But it seems to have like almost like a chess-ish. Like there's a lot of strategy that you wouldn't know if you didn't pay attention. I mean, there's plays being called. You're just talking about outside hitters and blockers. Like, you're trying to move people to where you want them so that you can get shot that you want, almost like tennis. But so there's a big mental aspect to it. So, like, the culture is everybody's got to be on their game, not just physically, but mentally as well.
Yeah, we value learning. On the world stage, we think that learning is a premium over talent, and so we consider ourselves students of the game. We spend a lot of time, as I mentioned, studying ourselves in practice, but also studying our opponents. And there's statistics to just about everything you can imagine. So we pay a lot of attention, like rotation by rotation, athlete by athlete, like what tendencies are, and we'll play to tendencies, and then design our offense and defensive systems around our strengths relative to another team or individual's tendencies.
How do you so if you're doing that for another team, do you try and break down your tendencies to figure out which ones they might be attacking?
Yeah, definitely. You have to know strengths and weaknesses on both sides.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, kind of like just as an individual, when you show up, like, you want to play to your strengths, right?
Sure.
So when the focus becomes...
You cover up your weaknesses as much as possible.
Too much on what another team is doing, then...
You're out of your game.
You tend to get pushed around by them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
We like to get into some things. You were a pretty competitive kid, to say the least.
And you kicked other kids for a while.
And you yelled at them, screamed at them.
Like,
told them
legally
that they were
kicked them.
worthless.
I did legally.
What was... how did your parents enable that with you? Like, how did they allow you to grow without feeling shame or worthlessness? Fire that probably was judged.
Or did you?
I think there were a couple aspects to it. My dad modeled risk for me, risk-taking, and so it was kind of like when I was young, if he jumped off of a 20-foot cliff when we were skiing, I jumped off in suit. And there was never kind of like a...
Just like a random... Is that just like a wild what if, or did that happen?
No, that's real.
Okay.
My dad was kind of like a bad boy, charismatic, but also an a-hole. So, but I never had a sense of like a limiting belief from him that because I was a little girl, I couldn't do what he was doing as a grown man, you know? So I think I learned the art of risk from him. And then my parents got divorced when I was 14. And I think this plays into it, but like my mom never kept me on a short leash. She always allowed me space to roam and run. And
he taught you risk, and she let you play with it.
Yeah.
Like, she gave you the space and he taught you what to do with it.
Right. But then she showed up and was there for... My mom owned her own business, worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week, and she never missed a thing I ever participated in.
Really?
And so,
with doing all that.
Yeah, and so like the support aspect was there, especially from her end, but then also like the challenge aspect of like, you know, hey, you can do this. Like, I'm going to do it so you can do it.
Physically and mentally,
yeah,
she was there.
Yeah.
Like, there was a safety.
Yeah.
Art of Risk.
Kate Sukol. Good book. You should read it.
Oh. Adding to my reading list today. Art of War.
Sun Tzu.
There's a really good graphic novel for that that's updated for the future. But Art of Risk, like, there's such thing as bad risk, but like, what does Art of Risk mean when you say that?
Yeah, I think it's like building capacity. One, it's like having space to go for it, but then two, especially if it doesn't work out, having some support and calibration so that you feel safe psychologically to go for it again.
So when you say go for it, like, defining risk, like what would you define risk as?
I think it's different for everyone, and we all have a different capacity for it, whether it's intellectual, emotional, physical. We all have a different kind of capacity for it. My risk is relative to me, relative to you. It's different. So I think it's finding whatever the edge of that is for you. Like, for some people, it's saying, I love you first. For other people, it's like jumping off of a cliff, you know, and their heart rate might get up differently or the same for those two things. And so if we never get to that space, though, then we don't have the chance to, like, understand where our capacity is at. And then once you're in it, what do you do with it? So part of it, like, as a kid, when we're looking at risk, it's like, do you have a support system, especially if it doesn't go well? as an adult, it's what are you attributing your successes and failures to when you're in the space of risk? Because if you attribute it externally, then you're less likely to go for it again, for example. But if it's like, no, I did this well, but like I could probably do this different again if I had the chance, and like I feel like I got this, then it's like, okay, I'm gonna be able to go for it again and risk again. And if it doesn't work out, then I'm still in the space of, like, we could say a growth mindset, but like an openness to learning, even though the outcomes aren't what we desire.
And even what you said earlier, like reflecting on why you even took the risk and
right.
what propelled you to be there in the first place.
Right. So what I was going to say earlier is, like, elite performers fundamentally design their lives around growth. And what that means is that there's going to be, what's likely to happen is that feedback is going to be difficult, and it's not always going to be good or reinforcing. So if we fall back to like self-efficacy theory, learning theory, social cognitive theory, like behaviorism, as human beings, we're more likely to repeat a behavior, which is the very essence of learning, if there's some sort of positive reinforcement, and if we feel like we can positively affect outcomes in the future by our effort. I think elite performers, because they're so committed to growth and learning, that even in the absence of positive reinforcement, or even in the presence of difficult feedback, they'll keep going.
Is that part of the art of risk then?
So what I was going to say is, like, there's no point in taking risk if you're not fundamentally, like, committed to growth.
Because that'll point because then your risk will be just aimless.
Self-talk will go in the opposite
right,
direction.
Exactly.
Just all over the place.
Yeah, and there's no judgment in that. Like, I think it's the human condition to fall back to what's comfortable in some sort of way. It's also helped keep us safe and survive.
Alive.
And so it's much easier to, like, work hard, work a 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and come home and, like, put a hoodie on and, like, watch television over the weekend, rather than, like, continue to find ways to grow in your spare time, Mm-hmm. And I get that. Like, the pace and speed and the demands that we all have are insane. But I do think that, like, fundamentally, like, that is one of the differences, because I've played, some of the best athletes I've played against could not hack it on the national team for 2 weeks because they couldn't get into that mindset of growth. They're so used to being the greatest athlete on their team that they were never forced to get uncomfortable.
Talk about that more. But, like, for real, like, Chris Paul.
I think that's the trap in success. Is like, I've done this a certain way.
Yeah.
And I've reached a certain level of success, maybe even one of the best on my team, one of the best in the country, one of the best in the world. And it's much harder to get uncomfortable knowing that you're likely maybe to get a little bit worse before you get better because of the attachment to success. So I think how we define success fundamentally also is an issue here.
How do you define success? Or do you just define it for you? And then how do you define it?
Process of becoming my best.
The process.
Yeah, so it's about process, not outcomes. It's about my best versus someone else determining what that is.
How do you balance that with, say, being on a team where there's the goal is to win,
right,
and you've got stats for your position or whatever, and maybe you're not hitting those, so there's the external saying, hey, you're not hitting this. Maybe you can't do this anymore. Like, how do you balance that from a personal happiness standpoint? Like, say you're not hitting the goals.
Yeah.
And you're still doing what you feel you can do, or trying anyway. Like,
I'm not saying outcomes don't matter, and I'm not saying that I don't care about outcomes. What I'm saying is that I have a really clear understanding that they're just a distraction and that they're not in my control.
Is it like a priority thing, or a hierarchy, like the process over the results?
You could think of that, or it's just command of mind, like training your mind so that when you're distracted, whether it's by an outcome or a squirrel, that you can come back to now and to what you need to focus on in the present moment to be your best. So outcomes matter. Like, we all have an invisible handshake in the roles that we play. It's like, we love you. Like, here's your salary. Like, we'll coach you up or we'll be there with you. But if you don't, until you don't perform, and then, like, sorry, you got to go somewhere else. And that process is a lot quicker on the world stage than it is in most other environments. You have 2 weeks to stat out.
How many people are trying to get your position?
My position, 4 or 5 people, but one gets to go.
Actively on the team?
One gets to go.
One
gets to go. So unlike,
but then in the rest of the world, there's still more trying to get into those 4 or 5 spots.
Yeah. About 85% of people that train with us don't make the team.
They're probably,
and
not
it's a
gonna make
3.5 year tryout.
How do you help
How did
people?
you do a 3.5 year tryout?
I have no idea.
I did 10 interviews and was like, I am
I'm
done
done.
with this. Like, I am so good on
Yeah.
being evaluated. And that was like, and that 10 interview process is not good enough to get to know somebody.
Yeah.
Like, to really know if they fit or if you fit with them or you even want to be there. 3.5 years is probably better for that. But good God, that's probably mentally exhausting.
Yeah. I mean, we could tie that back to just like resilience, the ability to bounce back from adversity, because that's essentially what it is like adverse experience after adverse experience. You hear no a lot. You don't stat out. You don't get the outcomes you always want. Even if you make rosters, you're not always the starting player. There's a lot of questions. You could be the best in the world too and get injured, a week before the Olympics, and there you go. So, like, do you have a clear sense of what's in your control and the ability to let go of what's not through the process? Do you have the mindset that things are challenges versus threats? And then do you have a deep commitment to what you're doing? And when those 3 components are present, then you're more likely to be able to move through challenging situations and bounce back when things don't go as planned.
Challenge versus threats. What's the difference?
So when we, another way to think of it is like avoidance of failure or fear-based kind of mindset. And so,
so can you change which?
Yes. Yes, you can change your perception of how you view the world. And there are lots of ways to do that. You could train optimism, for example. You could train mindfulness, for example.
I'm kidding.
Train naivete. No. So there are ways to train it. One is to understand your relationship with challenge. Like most of us like to think that we love challenge, but like when someone says, okay, who wants to go first? Like, do you raise your hand with excitement? Like, that's a very simple way of thinking about it. Or if you've ever been in a meeting and you had a great idea to share, but you didn't raise your hand because you were afraid of what someone else would think of you, or you weren't sure it was a safe place,
like my childhood.
Then then fundamentally you don't love challenge, And so I think we live in a
Which
world.
Is okay, but we just never evaluate it.
Right. We live in a world where like safety is prime, and we learn to play
because of our brains.
Maybe a little bit, and I think also from a social cultural standpoint, like we learn to play it safe from a very young age. Like as kids, when you're excited to go out and play, and like your hair's a freaking mess and your t-shirt's on backwards, like your mom's probably yelling at you, like, "Hey hey Johnny, get out of the dirt," or like, "Don't run across the street so fast, you're gonna get hit with the car." Great, yes, we need to learn safety, but like it's constantly like priming our mind for anxiety. Like something could go wrong in the future if I go for it right now. And so we learn to play it safe and to worry about whether other people think of us because of the messaging that we get when we're kids, versus like, okay, let's figure out how to go for this in a way. And like, I'll be there if it doesn't work out, but like, let's see what happens right now. So I think that's part of it. The messaging that we get as we're growing up is to play it safe. And then what happens is when we have these models of people who aren't playing it safe, we tend to label them as extreme, like extreme athletes, right? Versus adventure athletes. Like that nuance in language, we do that with ourselves, So like when the thought comes up when we want to share an idea and we're worried about what someone could think of us, do we think, oh crap, this could be bad? Or is it like, well, screw it. If they don't like what I have to say, like, I think this is going to add value to everybody else. I'm going to go for it right now. And then, like, if it doesn't work out, I'll figure out how to adjust, Like,
like starting a podcast.
Yeah. So just like the nuance in how we think of that, is it a threat? Is it stress? Is it distress? Is there a fear that we're trying to avoid? Or, like, can we just show up and embrace whatever comes? So that's what I mean by challenge.
Thanks.
How do you help people accept their best self when we have a natural inclination to compare, right? Like you're the best in the world at what you do and an Olympic athlete, and you've strived very purposefully to get there. But, and we talk about like some people's best self is that 9 to 5, And, I used to think I wanted to be a CEO until I realized what a CEO actually, what it took to get there and what actually meant to be there. It's like I have no interest in being that. It took me a long time to accept that as an okay outcome, depending on, what my best self actually is. Like, how that's like a piece of this discovery of who you are and finding a way not to say, okay, your best self, awesome. Mine, not that, but I love what you're doing. How do you get that? How do you help people get that?
That's tough. I will say I want to put a pin in that comparison is not always bad. It is part of learning theory, the idea that what you're doing is a little bit better than me. And I think I can do that too. We need others to explore potential. There would be a trap to living with blinders on in a bubble and not ever peering out to what's possible. Right. So what takes place though is many of us will peer too far out without taking the steps or having sort of a realistic idea of how to get there.
What it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to acceptance, I think it's really challenging. It's a journey that I'm still on. When I teach things like confidence, coming from self-talk, right, and the mechanics of how to get that right, underneath it all is self-acceptance, self-compassion, self-empathy. And I think it's really difficult, especially for people who are getting after it in some sort of way because of the self-critique, because it has gotten most people
where they are.
Or
at least they feel.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it has to a degree.
To a degree, like we talked about earlier, right?
It's like having a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah.
It has to get you somewhere, right?
So then the question is is this working for me anymore? And I think we all reach a point where it's there's a moment of awareness, and I can't give that to my clients. Like you were saying, I wanted this for so long, and then I was wait a second,
joy in the pursuit,
because you had a moment of awareness.
Have to be dichotomous,
and so I think awareness is really key. Is this working for me? Is the reason why I'm driving towards this because I'm there's a fire in my belly for it, or because this is an idea that I've had, or maybe a seed that was planted that's not really mine. It's not really what I'm passionate about or driven
nobody
towards.
Can give you that. You
right.
just got to sit with it and figure it out.
Yeah.
Which we're taught not to do.
Right.
We're taught to follow the formula. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Whoever designed that formula wrote that formula.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so
it's there.
Became one.
Yeah. So in terms of self-compassion and self-empathy, it's can I hold space for myself in the same way that I would for my best friend in a time of need? And then can I meet myself with a level of understanding that I would with my best friend in a time of need? Because I think we're often trying to externalize those needs, holding space and understanding, and it gets in the way of acceptance.
Where are you at with that?
I think I've come a long way, especially in the last year. I've definitely.
What's that journey like? What does that look like for you?
For me, it's a lot of mindfulness around compassion, loving kindness, self-empathy. Also, a great book is Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach.
Thanks for the books.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed your question.
Right. What's the negative side of that? How has that looked for you during this?
I think some people think that acceptance is the same as complacency, and that I think for a long time I was reticent to go down that route because it's I might lose my edge, and they're not the same. They're not the same. Acceptance
is. So you're kind of actively fighting it.
Yeah. I think acceptance is not complacency. Acceptance is a willingness to just
I love you, but you suck.
No, a willingness to experience difficult things, and have a sense of balanced neutrality or balanced perspective around it. I think another thing that gets in the way of acceptance is just attachment, attachment to experience and to outcomes.
That's what Yoda says.
There you go. And
he's the master.
And he's the master. So.
And he speaks funny.
Your life is yours, it is. That was a really bad quote. I made it up. My mind doesn't think like Yoda. I have to ask a question, kind of going back, because you slid this in there, and I don't want it to. Your parents got divorced at 14.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure that played a part.
Good job. Write that down.
What did you mean by that?
I think in retrospect, sport was an outlet for me. It was a coping mechanism for what I was experiencing at home, which is one of the reasons why I was so competitive.
Were you aware of it, or was it just that?
No, I wasn't aware of it. And
Was it a hard divorce on you then?
I actually wanted my parents to get divorced.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad was
And you were acutely aware of it?
my dad was physically abusive to my mom.
Oh, so you were acutely aware of it. Yeah.
Not up until the point of their divorce, but early on in life, until probably I was, I don't know, 8, 9, or 10. I don't remember. But my mom had black eye, broken nose. There were police at our house on several occasions. The last time I saw my parents together, I physically had to separate them. So,
like last time, like recently?
no, sorry, when I was 14.
Oh,
like
14.
Okay.
So I got, that like my parents shouldn't be together. It was hard for me because when I was a little kid, even though my dad was physically abusive to my mom, he was like the apple of my eye, and we did everything together, and he was never physically abusive to me. As I got older and started to have my own voice and speak out about what I was seeing and hearing, then he started to become, I would say, like more verbally abusive or neglectful. So I think I was always searching for just stuff outside of that, and so sport was great for me in that I found a support system outside of home, and then I was able to work out some aggression,
A little bit physically.
Yeah, physically,
in a real way,
in a real way, And so, but now it makes sense to me, like I was sharing last night that like I was reactive and like super competitive. I would get annoyed with my teammates if they didn't work hard. And so, people would call me a bitch sometimes. And I was saying how grateful I was to my coach's wife because she kind of guided me, like, like you're competing hard, but there's another way to do this. But when we look at like, there's so much research now around early childhood trauma and exposure to violence and experiencing violence.
Yeah.
And what we know now is like the question is not what's wrong with you, it's what has happened to you. And no one asked me that question ever because I'm white and I come from a middle class family. And
you're good, right?
Right, I'm good, right?
You're privileged.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, not to feel any
Yeah.
negative way. Yeah.
So I think I just continued to like really push the edge in terms of sport because it was a little petri dish for me to explore myself.
I just saw a thing the other day. I think it was on Instagram. It was like, it's not I am depressed. It's I have depression.
I have depression. That's right. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's.
Is that why you do what you do today? Like, does that play a role in it?
For sure, yeah. I think once I got some space after retirement from my career and I started to understand my psychological framework and kind of what was driving me for so many years to be good, that I realized that, and going back to something we talked about earlier, is that like high performance and joy in the pursuit of being your best do not have to be dichotomous, but that's often the model that we see.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that fires me up most is that, like, one, I think a common characteristic of really high performers, elite high performers, is that they've had some sort of pain early in life that has driven them, which means that there are things that need to be addressed. A lot of high performers struggle with depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and so, which I don't want to say I like suffered from, but I dipped into at times in my career, but also like because of my inability to filter through, like the one bonehead mistake on certain days, like I didn't have a ton of joy in my experience of being on the world stage. And so, yes, knowing what I know now, like I want to be able to help people and create space for people to pursue their best, but also understand the mechanisms for thriving and flourishing and joy in the process of doing so.
How have you? I don't know what the end result is for you, but processed.
I think,
sport.
I think especially in the last year, I've been doing more of it. I have a therapist. She's great. We dive less into like the traumatic experience, but how it's shaping how I'm showing up in my relationships. I've spent more time just actually let me rewind. As part of my coping with all of it was to compartmentalize things. I think a lot of like
who
elite
does that
performers
really
in
well.
some way, you know, like
I'm an expert
yeah,
compartmentalizer.
yeah, like it's a
They should
great
hire me at the dock.
it's a great coping mechanism. It really
Totally.
is. Like
Yeah.
package things up neatly, like find a way to understand it and put it to the side. And so like my dad, for example, I haven't talked to him in 20 years. My dad is a good example of that. It's like he's something that like once I walked away from that, I compartmentalized it, you know, and it was an issue I once had. But he's still my father. I still have his DNA, you know? And so like one of the things that like has helped me through that is my therapist, like just saying that out loud is like, you are not your father, but you are your father's daughter, you know? And so, but what that means is like, you can learn how to deal with it when it comes up, because it's always going to come up, because he is a part of who you are, right?
Literally a part.
Right. Whereas I was like, no, like, you know, like that's a thing in the past. And so just understanding now more through doing work with my therapist and then sitting with it in mindfulness meditation, when things are coming up and why they're coming up for me because of my past and because of the trauma, and then having more skill really around confronting it, sitting with it, like actually like feeling the emotion, and then creating space between what maybe used to be a reaction and now is a response.
Those two things, so compartmentalizing, feeling the feeling, like what are the actual things you do? I mean, probably some of them you said, meditation and stuff like that, but like...
Yeah. I think in the beginning it was really hard for me because I was used to compartmentalizing, especially my emotions, that I would intellectualize something and so I actually didn't ever learn the skill of holding space for myself.
It was a good
It's a
whistle.
really good whistle.
But I was thinking intellectualizing.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
oh, I've never
Yeah,
done
yeah.
that. Oh, wait, all the time.
I never like learned how to hold space for myself. You know, like when you're a kid and like something is wrong, like mom holds us, right? And I never learned how to do that for myself. And so
Have you learned to now?
I'm learning, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Call me when you get it.
Yeah.
Or
So-
like when you find something that helps.
So my experience when I made the commitment to myself to stop compartmentalizing was that I would go into an abyss of the emotion. I wasn't able to
And
just
I'd
like
be in it.
Yeah, and be in it. I wasn't able to just like dip into it. I think the word that I'm looking for is titrate.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
scientific on us.
Yeah, I wasn't able to just like dip into it and feel it a little bit and then come out of it. So I'd go into like this
Or just completely neglect it.
right, or completely neglect
I mean, that's
it.
the way I roll.
Yeah, and so I would go into like this abyss when I would allow myself to feel, and
And
it
it hurts.
sucked.
It
like I
hurts.
literally said to a friend, like, "How do you do this every day? Like it's so
fucking
painful,
draining.
Yeah, and it's really draining, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't just through the process of like sitting with it and continue to do the repetitions like any other skill,
Like any
other skill we
yeah.
have, right? And this goes back to acceptance, allowing myself to be in it, you know.
Do you think the skill set that you learned as an athlete allowed you to persevere through that pain? Because I think that's a lot of what people struggle with.
Yeah, yeah,
That it sucks
yeah.
when you feel that way about yourself for the first time after however many years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, nah, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
There's also some like value assigned to that feeling. Like I shouldn't feel like that.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
There's worse things in the world. Or,
Yeah. I think part of it was grit, you know, like just like having done difficult things for long periods of time in the past. Like I think also part of it was acceptance, like letting go of the value of assigned to emotions. And yeah, I think part of it also was just like a strong commitment that like my model in the past was like I don't want to be like my father, versus this was part of the shift for me is like this is who I want to be, and a strong commitment to that, and a knowing that if I didn't stop compartmentalizing and learn to sit with my emotions, that I was never going to be the person that I want to be.
how did you like? Was there like a this isn't working moment or?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How many?
Oh yeah, yeah. There was definitely like, dang, this is like really getting in the way of my relationships with people.
Yeah.
This is something Dr. Mike I mean, talks about. You mentioned it. Like this underlying theme of high performance athletes is that there's like some sort of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
How do you switch that paradigm or tap into that drive without introducing that trauma? right? Like, hey, kid, I want you to be a high performing athlete, so I'm just gonna kick you in
Well,
the
it
face
depends on the
right
person.
now,
'Cause
right?
some people are more or less sensitive to it, so it depends. Probably.
Like,
Yeah, I think it's I think it is highly dependent on the individual. I think a lot of it is creating space for someone to test themselves and to see what's taking place for them in moments of test. And then if you're really present with that person, you'll learn something about how they need to be coached in that moment. And you just we use coaching as a term, not in sport context. You can use it in any context, but just optimizing an interaction with someone. And if you think about the greatest coaches that you've ever been around, managers, parents, teachers, whatever, what's likely is that they just got you. They understood you in some sort of way. And it's really hard to get a person if you don't create space for them and then just like be with them through it and learn some stuff. So Coach Carroll calls this learning the learner. He'll put his athletes in situations to test them off the field in particular to see how they rise to that occasion or not. Because that's a lesson he learned early in his coaching career. So when you can just be present with people and learn what it's like for them as a learner, then you get some great information on how to work with them, and when you can do that and it's more of a dynamic interaction versus a top-down interaction, then you get more feedback about what has impacted them and why they're showing up the way they are. And then you can help them move the needle in some sort of way if they're open to it. I think it's really important to have insight when you're working with people, if they're open to coaching or if they're open to moving the needle in some sort of way, or if they're not ready for it.
I think that nails it, because for me, like, since I'm not able to give myself a lot of grace, having a therapist that could and like put it on the table and just like let's look at it, like it's not good, it's not bad, it just is, and then go from there, gave me a model of what it could look like to not judge it. And then like I'm starting to sort of kind of get there a little bit. But yeah, that rings like real true for me.
And hopefully, like for me there's a lot of light in that, there's like joy in that progress.
Yeah.
And
little pain,
but then
little pain, but a lot of
yeah.
But
like it feels good, like when you get it right, and then like you feel the moment of alignment.
Yeah.
And so
alignment. That's like a huge.
And
you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge.
Yeah.
Like you can feel that shift of like.
Time. Yeah.
I mean, I felt it in like some sports or some individual thing, like a presentation or a thing, but like feeling it in myself is like is cool. It's like I want more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially after.
Yeah.
Weird but good.
Oh yeah, it's awesome.
Weird good.
Then you want more.
Yeah.
You want it all the time. Like a drug.
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of.
I mean, who's into drugs?
All of us, actually. Our brains make them, by the way. So,
Yep.
yeah.
It's good stuff.
We're all big drug addicts.
Yep.
So, more in common. You just learned that.
More in common.
We all love drugs.
See what you did there.
Serotonin, caffeine.
It's a good
Yeah,
plug.
that's a good level set right there. How is it talking about this stuff? Like, you seem so freely open to share the stories, but like, how is that for you?
I think in the beginning I just shared because, to be honest, like I would share this stuff with some friends and they would like look at me kind of deer in headlights and not really react. And I've recently learned that they were like, I was like blown away by what you were sharing, but you seem so like, I think part of it too is like I've just in the last couple of years realized that the trauma I experienced was trauma. Through reading research on early childhood trauma, I was like, wait, I've experienced that.
Have you read Drama of the Gifted Child?
No.
Read it.
Oh, thanks. You're throwing a book recommendation at me. I like that.
That shit blew my mind.
Really?
Yeah.
Will you text that to me?
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think part of it is that like for a long time until I actually dove into the research, I didn't realize that what I experienced is technically called trauma. I also think because I've lived such a good life, I had all this success and achievement or whatever that like I think I just disconnected from it, So I share now openly because I've seen the impact that it has on people when I share, and trauma is way more prevalent than we think. And the driving thought for me always when I go into a situation is like, what kind of ripple effect can this make? And so I'll share anything if there's a potential impact that is lasting for someone.
How do you look at trauma? Is one of those things, as we've gone through a lot of work over the last year,
A lot of trauma,
a lot of uncovering of what trauma manifests or how it manifests everybody differently. Sometimes going back to the whole comparison to like I can call what you went through easily trauma, but
that doesn't make it traumatic.
Doesn't make it traumatic, or because I didn't go through that, what I went through less traumatic. Just because that's my experience, my worldview, and what I do. Like, how do you look at trauma, especially when you're helping other people reconcile their trauma?
I'm not there yet with helping others reconcile their own trauma. That will be a focus of mine in my doctorate program, but I think creating space, like you were talking about, like your therapist has done for you, because there is a risk of re-traumatization, and there is a trap in thinking that there's such a thing.
You're gonna love that book.
There's such a thing as like a big T trauma, which is how we used to think of it. Like there were these extreme experiences of trauma, and neglecting the cumulative effect of what used to be called like a little T trauma. So Dr. Van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score, is a great book on trauma, and he's one of the foremost experts.
Turns out we're recording them.
Yeah.
Oh wait.
On trauma, and so I've learned a ton about trauma from reading his work.
Do you know Dr. Gabor Mate?
Yeah.
Of him?
Yeah.
That's where I got Trauma, the Gift of Child, and then he does a lot on trauma,
Mm-hmm.
like his trauma of his mom giving him up in Poland to save him from the Nazis.
Yeah.
But he experienced it. He's a very sensitive individual, very sensitive child, and he experienced it as his mother abandoning him.
Yep.
And it's gone into his issues with substance abuse and attachment, all that kind of stuff. But like, for some people, they'd have been like, "Oh yeah, I get it." Like, cool. It wouldn't. Have
what
been
a great thing
wouldn't have
she
been
did for me, right? Yeah.
Saved my life.
Yeah.
And you can hold both,
Right.
Also,
Right.
so it's like,
which is, like I think that's part of the reason I've been so resilient through it, is that I've never taken the lens of like the victim through the situation, and no judgment in that. Like I just have always found a way to attribute what's happening.
Like, that was part of the. I am not depressed. I have depression. It was like all of the things that show up in our lives have a purpose. Like you were saying, like neuroticism. Like it's not necessarily bad. Like everything that shows up served a purpose at some point. It kept us safe. It protected us. It's just understanding it, and like when this is kind of like everything you've just said to us.
Yeah.
It's like understanding it. I'm getting it. It's like the light bulb just went on.
Being aware of it and then accepting its function. Right?
Yeah.
If you're aware of it and then you accept it because you sat with it.
Being aware of it. rather than I mean, we have the tendency to take these social constructs and say they're negative. It's like because we vilify mental health.
Well, I think that hurts with the external validation thing.
Yeah.
Like thinking about the prison system, it's like we have this idea in American culture anyway that like if you do a crime, you pay for it and then you're back. But that's not the way it actually works if you're a criminal. And then, but also in other areas as well. So like, I think that hurts with the external validation, like for some people, because they're actually literally being punished externally for that still. Right.
All of those standards.
Unless they've sat with it, had awareness of it,
and then accepted it. Right?
Which they may have because they've had a lot of time to sit with it.
Like when you think about neuroses, like what is its function in my life, and how has it been positive? Then accepting its positive nature and not letting it take you to.
Yeah, and understanding that that's not just who we are. For example,
it's
like
a thing in there.
It is a part of our makeup in some sort of way, and it served a purpose for whatever reason, and it may or may not be serving a purpose now, and that just because that's how you were in the past doesn't mean that change is not possible in most situations, I think what's tough about mental health is like, and with the stigma around it, is it's actually more normal than it is abnormal.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is part of the human experience to experience depression, for example, or anxiety. And when we stigmatize it or vilify it, that it's just making it more difficult for all of us to have the full range of experience as a human being.
Yeah.
You know, like, how do we know love and joy if we don't dip into the other side of it, you know? But if we're so averse or trying to avoid it all of the time, then like, what is the nature of our joy and happiness, you know? Like,
I heard someone say that like cultures that don't have issues with body shape, they don't have eating disorders.
That's right.
Yep.
So there are some disorders that are culturally bound, and other disorders manifest themselves differently culturally.
So the bootstrap conversation. So meritocracy. Sport is one of the places where meritocracy actually works. Maybe some organizations, if they have a lot of good procedures in place. But in society, well, that's a leading question. I don't want to lead you. How do you feel about meritocracy outside of sport? Let me ask it like that.
Again, outcomes matter. And they make the world go round, you know. So I don't know how to conceptualize our world without it. I think there are huge traps to it, and then I think in terms of what it does to the psychology of people is it feeds into limiting beliefs, and so. What I would say to that, and I'm quoting Kobe Bryant, is that you always have to protect your dreams. Because as we become more, as we grow up, our dreams become more responsible. And part of that is because of meritocracy, because there's an understanding of that we're only capable of so much, and that we can only rise so high, you know. And so, but we'll never know what is actually possible for us if we don't protect our dreams.
And is that, from a psychological standpoint, holding space for yourself and your dreams?
I think it's more about being optimistic. I think it's more about setting a vision for yourself, which is a little different than a goal, but you know, something that has deep meaning for you, because it's worth pursuing. And when things don't work out, you know that you'll stay on the vein of improvement for whatever that is. I think that falls more into like hope as well, you know. And then at the end of the day, like, we're all going to experience setbacks. And it's how you respond that matters more than anything.
Last question, brother.
We always ask our guests to leave a pearl of wisdom for the listeners.
You haven't left enough.
Yeah, we want one more.
This is often something I talk about, but I think we don't get the mechanics of confidence right. In the United States, we don't teach it, and I think especially now we're in this at least in our culture, in our country, the model of like be more to do more, you know. And this is a Dr. Mike kind of thought, but that model's broken, and so everything we have is already within us. And if we can anchor more to the idea that like when things don't go as planned, that I can adjust and do work to be able to have great skill at adjusting, rather than the incessant need to prepare and to be perfect, that we'll probably like perform better. We'll feel more alignment, but there's a lot more joy in the experience. So for me, like, the skill of adjusting is one of the greatest things that I've ever been gifted.